Welcome back to my little corner, ladies and gentlemen. The 72 Ford Gran Torino, 70 Plymouth Cuda, 64 Impala, 66 Ford Fairlane GT, 67 Pontiac Firebird. Oh, I was playing with my cars there. How about I sketch a car? Name the second car from the second episode of Rust Valley Restorers, the Pontiac Beaumont Sport Delux. Let's get started. First things first, you can see me down in the right bottom corner. I totally forgot to turn off my webcam, so that image of me will sadly be there throughout the whole video, so I hope it doesn't bother you too much. Fun little fact for that though is that I was drawing this towards the end of the day, so you will see well, not the sun go down, but the room go from quite bright to totally dark with my face shining like a little sun there. But yeah, let me jump into the video and let's talk a little bit about the process. Not as much about the process, but just what I'm thinking with each of these drawings. So what I do is I do a couple of study sketches, I would like to say, one from the show and one just from the internet. And I do always at least two. Would be cool if I did more, but I do have to fit these into a time frame. So it is two that I draw, but this is mostly for me to understanding the character of each of these cars. Muscle cars have these very characteristic lines to them, and if you're not that familiar with cars, it's good to draw as many as possible so you understand which car has what character. And that's why, aside from the car that I draw from the show, I also look up a lot of reference on the internet, and I look at different angles, and I always try to draw at least a side angle of the car, because that's one of the angles that really gives you that character of the car. When it comes to the three-quarter view, how I try to get the proportions right is I always, well, as you could see, especially in some of the car drawing tutorials, is they take the wheel and they try to fit it into the car several times, and that's how they measure and that's how they try to see the proportions. What I do is I take the length, well, not the length of the car, but the width of the car, so the distance from one headlight to the other headlight, and I try to see how many times does that fit into the length of the car, but also into the height of the car. So that sort of gives me a relative measuring distance, so I know what I'm working with. It's usually also better if you draw section lines, which I didn't necessarily do here, and by section lines I just mean the lines that divided the car into two, usually going through the middle. And that helps you also a lot when you want to measure and relatively position items on the car. Two of the mistakes that I usually do, one is with the wheels. I tend to draw the back wheel always smaller than the front wheel, and this is obviously when I'm talking about the three-quarter view, not the side view. And I also managed to do the front wheel sometimes too big. I think in this case the front wheel is okay, but I definitely went too small with the back wheel. And that is also something that I will definitely fix during the inking stage, so I know that there I fixed it a little bit, but it's just a mistake that I tend to do. And it's good to look out for something like this, and I still I do make it from time to time, but the good thing is, as long as you keep it in mind, slowly but surely you will phase it out, and slowly but surely you do the mistake also less, and the size difference that I do, it also becomes less and less. I have already noticed that. And then the other mistake that I think here I didn't do, to be honest, is the greenhouse, which is basically the windows and where your head is visible. I tend to make that also a little bit out of proportions. I make it too big and then it looks a little bit cartoony. You could see that in my previous drawing, but here I was paying a little bit extra attention and I'm actually quite satisfied with it. One thing that I wanted to add is that I am definitely not a car designer, so I am sort of learning, and that's also why I'm pushing myself to draw this many cars, is because I do like cars
quite a bit, and I want to get better at drawing them, but it is still very hard for me to just sit down and come up with car designs from nil. So don't expect it from yourself either. So when you want to sit down and draw something and it doesn't come out as you want it to, just as with everything else, you need practice, and that's what I'm doing here. I'm just practicing my car drawing skills, and still there is a little bit of cheating in there for me, because at least for me, muscle cars, the specific shape of muscle cars is much more fun, but it's also easier to draw for me than the modern sleek cars with the curves. It's pretty much the same with me, as at least drawing cars here, as drawing girls as well, because compared to the male anatomy and the male figure, the female figure is much curvier and it's much harder to control for me, especially with my very liney industrial design style. So that's why I do stick a little bit to muscle cars, because I feel I have much more control over. But still, at least it's a little bit of exercise. Jumping back into the process, since I'm working digitally, and if you're working digitally as well, don't be afraid to use the tools. Copy, paste, erase, just do everything. That's what I started doing quite often here as well. Just take the wheel from the front, push it to the back. If I'm working in 3D as well, you will see it later on in the digital inking part. I'm just going to take the wheel that I already drew out in the front, I'm going to push it in the back, and I'm going to squeeze it a little bit so it fits the perspective better. Obviously I will have to touch it up and I will have to work a little bit more on it, but it is also a little bit about making your process faster. These are not masterpieces. I don't have endless time to spend on them, so it is good to work as smart as possible when it comes to things like this. And one thing that also I wanted to mention in the beginning is that I usually work on 2 layers. One is a super rough sketch and then I start cleaning up, and this is also what happens here. But sometimes I also work on 3 layers, and instead of working on 3 layers, so one super rough, then one rough, and then one the clean line, I sort of put the super rough and the rough onto one layer. So that is to keep the dynamic lines that I have in here, because I tend to complain a lot about losing some of the dynamism of my lines when I transition into the digital ink, and because of that I thought, okay, at least let's try to keep the early sketching phase as dynamic as possible. So I'll just simply draw over the early establishing line, and then I have a whole lot of lines that I can play around, and that can give a little bit of cheekiness to my drawing. You will also see me do a little bit of design work here, which could be taken as a little bit of waste of time, since the end result, this is not shown anyway. But I thought, since I'm doing these study sketches, why not show them off, and why not make them a little bit more appealing as well. And since they're not going to have color, I thought, okay, let's just add a little bit of extra design element, and I just do sort of a logo of each car. And as you can see here, you don't have to draw everything from head or everything, like make a perfect study. If there's a logo, feel free to trace it. At some point you also have to think about the end result, and the end result has to be cool, and if it's cooler if you trace that logo, then feel free to do that. And also, I didn't want to just paste the logo in here, because obviously it would have clashed very much with the sketching style that I established, so it's just much smarter to trace over it. So yeah, then I have these sketches that I want to show usually. I also show the inked version and obviously the final rendered version, which will come in the next video. But yeah, there's not much to say about the inking process. It's just paying attention, especially to the line weights. You want to have thicker lines on the outside, thinner lines on the details on the inside, and thicker lines also where you know that there's going to be shadow or where you need more contrast. And you can also use thin lines in the beginning to set up those ink strokes, and then you can go over them again and make them thick. I try to keep the lines here playful as well, so I try not to be way too clean and sterile with them. And I think it works, so I do manage to, I'm much more satisfied with these lines than I usually am. And it's also quite a lot of fun. I never notice how the time goes by when I do the inkings and the sketching and then the rendering as well. So I must say, all in all, these are really fun sketches and drawings to do. And yeah, that's all I wanted to show in this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Consider clicking that like button if you did, and also subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this. You can also follow me on Instagram for more drawing related updates. And as always, wish you folks a great week and see you next time. Bye bye.